reincarnation is like spinning a roulette wheel. You might be reborn as an animal or even as a cockroach scuttling on the ground. So if you're lucky enough to be reborn as a human again, it's like beating the odds. Our protagonist was fortunate enough to survive this game of chance. The roulette wheel landed on human once more. But in his previous life, he literally worked himself to death. Things seemed promising this time around, but there was a catch. The body he reincarnated into belonged to an extra in a dark, depressing novel he used to enjoy. Specifically, the character is a one-time villain who gets killed off in the first chapter, the hopeless troublemaker Hanseha. As he reflects on this with a disappointed look, the panel reveals that Hanseha is a talented but lazy young man with a dangerous interest in black magic, which eventually leads to his tragic end when he discovers its taboo. He also has a petty personality unable to overcome his greed and ultimately dies as an insignificant character. His abilities seem unpromising, so there's no need to dwell on them. Instead, let's focus on the real situation at hand. Our protagonist now finds himself in a problematic position, cursing the spinning wheel for making him possess someone like that. He demands half-jokingly that if he had free will to choose, he would have picked someone more promising, a hero, or at least someone handsome. Worries that this situation will only bring him trouble. Possessing a one-time villain is bad enough, but doing so in such a dire context makes it even worse. The current setting is an auxiliary facility for dark mages. Hanseha, once regarded with high expectations due to his natural magical potential, was briefly acknowledged but ultimately ostracized at the academy because of his lack of real-world skills. It seems Hanseha came here to join a dark magic organization. Now, as he stands before them, the mysterious individuals facing him seem to ignore him. One asks who he is, and another responds dismissively that he's just a kid begging to join their organization. They also mention that he's a student at Ardwell Academy. This gives one of the men a bold idea. He looks at the boy with an evil glint in his eye and suggests that if he's a student of Ardwell Academy, he might be useful to them. He then orders him to follow. Hearing this, he begins to panic, sweating as he debates whether to comply. However, he can't defeat them, so he agrees and follows them. As they walk, one of the men asks if he knows the procedure for joining. He replied confidently that, of course, he knew the procedure, all the while thinking that once he drew the blood of a member and swore an oath to dark magic, he would be trapped forever. How could he not know? He also recalled that the dark mage organization Hanseha was about to join was a typical evil force destined to be destroyed by the novel's protagonist. If he went through with the dark mage contract, he knew he would be killed by the hero too. Instead of following those men, he realized he needed to figure out how to escape this death trap immediately. As he fretted over his predicament, he suddenly froze when a notification appeared, a system prompt synchronizing with Hanseha's perspective. The synchronization loaded, and when it finally completed, the system issued a warning: escape now. Shocked by the sudden appearance of what seemed like a cheat code, he couldn't believe his luck, but the warning on the screen stunned him for a moment. Just then, a loud voice echoed through the area, like the eerie scream of someone being tortured. Holding his breath, he sprinted down the dim corridors, but he had no idea where the exit was. Exhausted, he stopped to catch his breath, muttering to himself that he was running around like a lunatic without any sense of direction. As he paused, he noticed the locked door ahead and saw some light approaching, making him wonder if he was heading in the right direction. But this was only a guess. Before he could decide what to do, a sudden voice startled him, realizing that a member of the dark magic group was passing by. He quickly hid. As he listened, he overheard two men discussing a kid who had escaped from the third basement floor. It was clear they were talking about him. Hearing the men's conversation, he felt a surge of panic, certain that if they found him, he would be dead for sure. As the two men walked away, they mentioned that the boy was a student of Ardwell Academy and suspected he might be a spy. Once they were far enough, he scanned his surroundings, ensuring it was safe. When he was sure no one else was nearby, he rushed to the door in front of him. But it was locked. Desperately, he tried to force it open, knowing deep down it was futile. When the door didn't budge, hopelessness crept in. Frantic, he considered his options. He cursed under his breath, realizing that in this situation, the only thing he could rely on was his memory. Although Hansia was considered worthless, he had to come up with something. He remembered that while Hansia had no talent for white magic, he was born with magic power within his body. However, the magic power was so uncontrollable that he couldn't even figure out which goalpost he was aiming for. In other words, he just needed to focus and control his magic. Concentrating intently, he managed to direct the magic power into his fingertips. Placing his hand on the lock, he released all of it, hoping it would open the door. Unfortunately, nothing happened. Exhaustion washed over him, worse than when he was running. Catching his breath, he muttered that his skills were still far from adequate, and that he had a long way to go. Suddenly, he sensed a figure in the darkness behind him. It moved towards him with a domineering aura, its eyes glowing as they locked onto him. Realizing something was approaching, he turned around, convinced this was the end. But to his surprise, he saw a beast, a little dragon, staring at him, roaring in an adorably high-pitched tone. Instead of feeling fear, he was amazed. The dragon approached and tugged on his robe, signaling it wanted to be picked up. Perplexed, he picked up the dragon, wondering how such a creature had ended up in this place and why it was so friendly towards him. As he pondered, he told the dragon coldly and directly that he couldn't take it with him, explaining that it was hard enough managing himself. How could he possibly care for it? The little dragon, shocked by his words, began acting out and crying like an innocent baby. Despite his cold resolve, the dragon's antics made it impossible to quiet down. With no other choice, he reluctantly decided to take the dragon with him as he continued to run. Frustrated, he muttered that the little dragon was doing this on purpose. He knew he shouldn't adopt something he couldn't be responsible for. But as he ran, he suddenly stopped and realized since it had come to this, maybe he should try using the dragon's power. As he stared at the little dragon, the system suddenly popped up, informing him that his taming ability had been unlocked and asking if he wished to tame the dragon. The system identified the creature as a suspicious hatchling and displayed its stats, a level 2 with 50 magic power, along with strength, agility, and intelligence stats. It also had a level 1 flamethrower skill. Surprised and somewhat confused, he noticed something even more frustrating. There was no accept button on the system interface. He realized he would need to tame the dragon the old-fashioned way. He began to assess his situation. Despite his frustration, he remembered that when it came to taming, he actually had quite a bit of experience and talent. Boasting about his technique, he used a few gestures to offer reassurance and build trust with the little dragon. With a serious expression, he told the dragon to trust him, though deep down, he worried if he was doing it correctly. Thankfully, the dragon seemed to accept him as its contractor. It floated into the air, releasing a glowing light, signaling that the taming was successful. As the dragon descended, he wondered if he had truly succeeded, suspecting there might be more to it. However, he decided to test it right away. He addressed the dragon as Reptile and gave it its first command to break the lock on the door. The cute reptile moved forward, its eyes glowing with determination. It leaped up and bit the chain lock, shattering it instantly. He was shocked. He hadn't expected the lock to break so easily. With the lock destroyed, they were finally on the verge of escaping. He praised the dragon, telling it, "Good job," feeling a glimmer of hope that they might just make it out alive. But suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching and a wave of dread washed over him. As he turned around, he saw the men who had been chasing him. They spotted him and sneered, calling him a rat and threatening to roast him alive if they caught him. Panic surged through him as he found himself paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. The men were closing in and he forced himself to think. Desperately searching his mind for a solution, he recalled a spell called Smog, the first self-defense spell taught at the academy. Though he knew the spell, he had never actually used it before. But in this situation, he had no choice but to try. Without further delay, he steadied his breath and focused his energy on his fingertips, imagining he was holding a gun. To his relief, light began to form at his fingertips. The men halted in their tracks as he quickly cast the spell, enveloping the area in a thick cloud of smoke. Amazed and relieved that his spell had worked, he used the distraction to flee, making his way to the door. Just as he started to open it, a sudden spectral hand appeared, gripping him by the neck. Shocked and unable to breathe, he collapsed to the ground, his vision blurring as the hand choked him. His loyal reptile companion rushed to his side, its worried eyes reflecting his own despair. He wondered if this was truly the end. The man who had cast the demonic spell sneered, taunting him. "At least your death will be painless." Lying there, he felt the weight of his hopeless situation. To be reborn only to die again, it was too unfair. Desperately, he tried to think of a way to break free, even as he struggled for breath. Just when things seemed truly hopeless, he remembered one last card he could play. His pet reptile, the little dragon, sensing his distress, clung tightly to his robe, eyes full of concern. Struggling to speak, he gasped, apologizing for his lackluster taming skills. He looked into the dragon's eyes with determination and asked if it could lend him a hand. The little dragon opened its wings, its demeanor shifting to one of fierce resolve. It approached the spellcaster, eyes glowing with a fiery intensity. Then, with a mighty roar, it unleashed a torrent of flames, a flamethrower attack that engulfed the man. As the flames consumed the man, the spectral hand around his neck vanished, freeing him. Gasping for air, he watched as the little dragon ensured the threat was eliminated, its flames leaving nothing but scorched remains. The dragon then turned back. It let out a concerned roar as if asking if he was all right. Still catching his breath, couldn't help but smile. He hadn't expected things to turn out this way, but he was immensely grateful to have such a loyal and powerful companion. The little dragon jumped onto him, and the two shared a moment of comfort, a brief respite from the chaos. Stroking the dragon's scales, he softly said, "I owe you my life. I promise I'll take care of you." But first, he reminded himself they needed to escape. An hour later, they were now trekking through a desert, seeking refuge in a distant cave. As they walked, putting more and more distance between themselves and the dark mages, he began to feel a sense of relief. However, the scorching sun was relentless, and he found himself growing increasingly thirsty. His little companion was also worn out and parched, vowing never to let himself be caught by those dark mages again. He knew it would mean certain death. Not far ahead, he spotted a carriage and approached it, hoping for some help. He asked the old driver if they could get a ride. The old man squinted at him, then asked, "Do you have money to pay for the ride?" Without hesitation, he checked his robe pocket and found a gold card. He showed it to the old man and asked if it would be enough to get them a ride. The old man's eyes widened in shock upon seeing the card, recognizing it as one provided by Ardell Academy, a card that conferred significant privileges. After reconsidering, the old man eventually agreed to let them in. Grateful, they thanked him and took their seats in the carriage. As they settled in, the old man asked where they were headed. He hesitated, realizing he had rushed out without a plan, but knowing that the dark mages might soon be on his trail and that they would kill him to prevent any information from leaking. He had no choice but to head to the one place where people might still want him dead, but was also the safest place he could think of, Ardell Academy. As mentioned in the novel he had read, this was the start of his new journey. At Ardell Academy, a girl hurried toward the building. She was Celine, a second-year assistant professor, who marveled at the academy's luxurious marble floors and elegant chandeliers. Even the students' uniforms exuded an air of refinement. As she waved to the students, her gaze suddenly faltered when she saw him emerge from an old, dusty carriage. Surrounded by a cloud of dust, he stepped out, his robe tattered and his expression weary. Celine couldn't believe her eyes and nearly collapsed in shock, horrified at the sight of someone so unkempt entering their pristine academy. She wondered how a student like him had ended up there and looked down at him with disdain. Our protagonist, now feeling refreshed by the clean air, was oblivious to the professor's reaction. Celine was concerned that this boy, Hanseo, might tarnish the academy's reputation on the very first day of the semester. She recalled that Hanseo was a student who had nearly failed due to his inability to control his innate magical talent. Meanwhile, our boy kept his cute reptile hidden inside his robe, though the dragon was restless and eager to be freed. Noticing the frantic professor, he sized her up and quickly deduced that she must be a professor given her appearance and behavior. Approaching her, he asked if he was late. She confirmed that he was. She thinks he wasn't worthy of her attention and that she didn't have time to worry about a failure with no potential, and it wasn't worth her bother. remembering the rumors about him, stories of his creepy obsession with black magic, and the bizarre claim that he hugged a voodoo doll every night. She believed that getting involved with him would only bring trouble. Tapping his shoulder, she urged him to hurry inside. Despite her cold demeanor, he thanked her with a soft, bright smile. His unexpected warmth left her stunned as she watched him enter the academy. She realized, as a second-year professor, that her perspective had shifted. Once inside the classroom, he immediately drew the attention of his classmates, who murmured and gossiped about him. They labeled him as creepy, noting his recent entrance by carriage and his disheveled appearance. Despite the whispers, he remained calm, reflecting that he was likely doomed. Taking a seat alone at the back, he overheard his classmates speculating that he must have advanced to the second year due to some sort of favor from a professor. He wondered if his family had bribed someone for his advancement, if a professor had recognized some hidden potential in him, or if a magic tower had written him a recommendation. But he quickly dismissed these thoughts, deciding that his priority now was to figure out how to survive in this treacherous world using his own strength. He broke down his survival goals into two main objectives. First, he needed to find a quiet place to survive, though he hadn't discovered that sanctuary yet, so it wasn't an immediate concern. As a third-rate villain known for being violent and incompetent, he knew he faced the risk of a gruesome end, possibly being buried alive by the protagonists. This worried him, especially since the Academy's closure for the year meant he had some time, though the exact reason for his character's death remained unclear. It could be due to unresolved loose ends or other crimes he was unaware of. Determined to avoid such a fate, he resolved to live quietly and cautiously, preferring to work hard and die naturally rather than suffer a brutal death. His second plan was to graduate safely, adapting and carving out a life in this new world. He aimed to secure his future, recognizing that although his family was wealthy, they had disowned him due to his past behavior. Obtaining a diploma would be a reliable way to ensure a stable future and make a living. He decided that instead of getting entangled with the protagonist and risking his own demise, he would rather live quietly as an ordinary student, resolving to do his best to block every scenario that could lead to his end. He mentally prepared himself for the challenges ahead. When their professor arrived, the class collectively greeted him. The students murmured about the intense aura the professor exuded. He recognized him as Professor Grint from the magic department. While he tried to relax, his classmates expressed concern that their exams this semester would be difficult. Commenting on how intimidating the professor was, Professor Grint quickly silenced them, acknowledging that the students who had advanced to the second year were quite impressive. He mentioned that he had noticed some students who stood out, his sharp gaze scanning the room as he spoke. He agreed with Professor Grint, acknowledging that the presence of promising students, including the protagonist of the original story, raised the overall quality of the academy. He couldn't help but feel that this made the conditions quite unfavorable for him, as the academy's rules felt like a Jeopardy game, with every decision potentially leading to his downfall. Ardell Academy accepted students aged 14 to 19 and was renowned for its rigorous curriculum. Thanks to its promising students winning numerous competitions, the academy had become more like a competitive arena. However, only about 10% of students managed to graduate with high honors, which he found daunting given the intense competition. He wondered how he could possibly compete with the protagonist when he, in the original plot, rapidly grew his power within the black magic organization. Since he planned to live quietly, this seemed nearly impossible. At that moment, Professor Grint announced that many students did not meet the required standards, and those lacking the necessary skills would not be allowed to join his class. He felt as if he had received a harsh blow, especially when the professor's serious gaze seemed to land directly on him, scrutinizing him. After announcing the opening exam schedule, Professor Grint tapped the ground with his walking stick, causing an illusionary display to appear before them. He was stunned, his expression reflecting amazement at the sophisticated level of the spell. The display indicated that, based on his experience over the past year, he needed to freely choose 3 subjects and take both written and practical exams in those areas. He was impressed by the top-notch magic used by the academy, but quickly realized that being able to choose the exam subjects freely could be advantageous if he played his cards right. However, he suspected it wouldn't be that easy, sensing there might be a twist. Professor Grint then announced that he would personally draw the balls containing the students' names from a box to determine the order. He thought to himself that relying on luck for the exam was unfortunate, feeling as if fate was playing yet another cruel joke on him. Given his current lack of knowledge about magic, he knew his only option was to pick subjects early to manage his grades. He couldn't shake the feeling that his luck had already been used up escaping the dark magicians and was left wondering what to do next. As the professor drew a ball from the box, he announced that the first person to choose their subjects would be him. He was both surprised and somewhat relieved to have the first pick, feeling that maybe his luck hadn't completely run out after all. As he began reviewing the available subjects, he realized that, given his unfamiliarity with magic, he needed to avoid practical-oriented subjects and anything related to necromancy, as mentioned in the story. However, as he scrolled through the list, he found that all the subjects seemed difficult, leaving him struggling to choose a suitable one. Finally, one subject caught his eye: exploration of arithmetic and magic formulas. Although the name initially sounded intimidating, he decided it was the most manageable option available. He figured that since he was good at memorization, he could handle it somehow. His peers murmured about his choice, noting that the arithmetic subject was considered difficult among the options, and they were relieved that he had picked it. With the conversation buzzing around him, he quickly chose his remaining two subjects, noticing that one of them also seemed doable. The scene shifted to the library, where he was studying quietly. Reflecting on his past, he remembered that before coming to this world, he had worked as an intern veterinarian, and the subjects he chose were somewhat similar to his major in veterinary science. Deciding to focus first on exploration of arithmetic and magic formulas, he acknowledged that while the arithmetic methods were unique to this world, his existing knowledge of math might not apply effectively here. After finishing his studies on arithmetic, he moved on to a book titled Monster Anatomy, an introduction to basic taming and behavioral science. Immersed in his studies, he momentarily forgot about his pet, tucked away inside his bag. As other students passed by, they grew suspicious and curious about the moving bag. It became increasingly troublesome for him to ignore, especially as his cute dragon tried to wriggle out. Concerned about drawing too much attention due to its appearance, he gently pushed the reptile back into the bag. With too many prying eyes around, he had no choice but to leave the library. He recognized that his Hansio, who struggled with magic control, taming a dragon hatchling could raise suspicion and attract unwanted attention. He promised himself to be more cautious in the future. After leaving the library, he headed to the academy's underground training area. There, he told his cute dragon that it could run freely and behave like a wild beast, reassuring it that the area was a safe place. Believing that he had grasped the theory to some extent, he thought it would be a good opportunity to practice his taming skills. Approaching a staff member at the training ground, he requested an entry ticket to the beginner practice area. The staff member looked surprised and glanced at his cute dragon, remarking that it was a hatchling. She expressed her amazement that he would bring a dragon to the beginner area. Then, as she asked for the dragon's name, he realized with shock that he hadn't named his pet yet. He asked the dragon what its name was. The cute dragon, scratching its head in confusion, eventually chirped Chime with a happy reaction. He took this as a sign to choose a name for his pet, and the dragon seemed to agree. As he pondered, the dragon grew frustrated with his indecision, its aura intensifying. He suggested names like Carcharodontosaurus, thinking they were the coolest names he could come up with. However, the reptile's glare made it clear that if he didn't choose a good name soon, it might just roast him on the spot. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he decided to carefully select a unique and fitting name. After some thought, he ultimately chose Basilisk. The reptile's expression brightened immediately at the sound of the name, indicating its approval. The girl then registered the name and informed him that the training area could accommodate up to 2 people, mentioning that there was currently one other person in another room. After this, she guided them to the weaponry room, explaining that it was a rental service available for students like them. He noticed that the weapons seemed rather shabby, likely because they were free. He decided not to be picky, reasoning that he needed to get stronger and should be grateful for whatever he could get. He selected a shield and a wand stick. Once prepared, The girl led them to the gate of the beginner practice area. He felt a mix of worry, astonishment, and excitement. Inside, he was amazed to find that the place resembled a beautiful garden. As they explored, he spotted a slime and remarked that even low-level monsters seemed somewhat created half-heartedly. He asked Basilisk if he saw the slimes, and upon receiving confirmation, he coldly declared his intention to blow them up. Basilisk, stunned and shocked by his master's ruthless intention, trembled in disbelief, but had no choice but to comply. Basilisk moved forward and annihilated the slimes while he watched. He noticed Basilisk seemed to enjoy playing with those monsters, perhaps a sign that the dragon's instincts were awakening. As Basilisk devoured the slimes, he wandered around the area, noting that Basilisk seemed fine. Realizing that he too needed to practice and improve his skills, he resolved to make the most of this opportunity to strengthen his abilities. As he ventured further, he heard the noisy echoes of beasts and suddenly felt an attack coming from behind. He quickly turned around, stunned but able to react in time, raising his shield to defend himself. Seeing them in groups, he realized that his own strength alone wouldn't be enough to defeat them all. However, with Basilisk by his side and a solid strategy, he could take them down one by one at the right moment. Just as he formulated a plan, Basilisk, having finished off the previous block slimes, rejoined him. He asked Basilisk if he had stretched enough and then outlined his plan. They would repeat the strategy they had used before. Responding to the command, Basilisk unleashed its flamethrower on the approaching monsters. A powerful burst of destructive force erupted from Basilisk, and the monsters disintegrated into dust. He was taken aback. He hadn't expected Basilisk to become this powerful so quickly. Impressed, he praised Basilisk and encouraged him to keep pushing forward, vowing that they would continue to improve their skills and practice like crazy. Half a day passed, and both of them lay on the ground, exhausted. He remarked that while practicing his magic, he had constantly switched between taming Basilisk and casting offensive spells, leaving him utterly drained. He joked that he felt like he might actually die from the intense training. Observing his pet, he noticed that Basilisk had been listening to him remarkably well. He promised that when they returned to the dorm, he would treat Basilisk to some delicious food. Just then, he noticed some commotion below and went to check it out. He saw one of the students mentioned earlier by the girl, who had been training in the area first. It appeared that her beast was playing around, scooping up mud while she knelt in despair, clearly frustrated by her beast's refusal to obey. Her face was a mix of anger and frustration, ready to explode at any moment. After a moment, the girl calmed herself and stood up, determined to try again to command her beast. She did her best, but it was clear that the creature wasn't comfortable with her. It remained cautious and barked at her in defiance. Meanwhile, he watched her struggle to tame the hellhound, quietly commenting that her approach was wrong. He noted that she shouldn't handle the beast in such a manner. The girl shouted for the beast to come back and sit down, but it ignored her and ran off. Frustrated, she chased after it, muttering angrily about how the bastard wasn't listening to her and swearing that it would regret it if she caught it. As she searched for her unruly pet, she suddenly noticed something surprising. Her troublesome hellhound had become gentle and was now obediently sitting next to him. She approached them with a determined stride, wondering how Hansia, a second-year student with a reputation for failure, had managed to tame her pet so easily. Noticing her approach, he asked if the beast was her pet and mentioned that he had been observing her efforts for a while. He advised her that her approach to taming the beast was incorrect. The girl looked confused and deflated. Hansia explained that when a tamer becomes too emotional, it only agitates the beast further. She was surprised. She couldn't believe that Hansia was giving her advice. At Ardal Academy, the most prestigious school in the empire, this girl, Adele, an earth mage, had never ranked lower than third, despite her commoner background and the many challenges she faced. Few could match her skill. However, due to the opening exams being conducted by lottery, Adele ended up drawing the subject she was weakest in, Introduction to Basic Taming. She chalked it up to bad luck, knowing full well that her taming skills were lacking. That's why she was here, practicing. But what puzzled her most was Han Seo, the boy who couldn't even tame a slime last year, a failure she had witnessed with her own eyes. There were also rumors about him being obsessed with black magic, and she had always considered him gloomy. An inferior, a hopeless case. Yet here he was now, successfully taming her hellhound, making her usually defiant pet almost obsessed with him. Astonished by this turn of events, she asked him how he did it. He simply replied that her beast was no longer agitated and that she could take it back now. Grateful for the advice, Adele picked up her hellhound and thanked him. Curious, he then asked her why she had chosen a hellhound, noting that it was quite a challenge for a first-time tamer. She proudly explained that a difficult monster like the hellhound had a high value for her, especially since it was her first attempt in the subject. She wanted to prove herself. Understanding her reasoning, Hansia joked that he thought she might prefer a less challenging pet, perhaps one that enjoyed mud baths or something less daunting, making her annoyed by his teasing. Adele couldn't help but wonder about him. He speaks to her without hesitation, even though she was a commoner and he was a noble. As she observed him more closely, her eyes fell on the creature beside him, a dragon hatchling. What surprised her the most was that Hansia had already tamed it, a rare feat for someone at their level. As a second-year student, it was as if Hansia had become a completely different person. After that, they headed together to a spot where the block slimes were known to gather. Adele double-checked to confirm that they were in the right location. When he confirmed they were in the right place, Adele got to work. She pushed aside the vines and grass, revealing a group of block slimes hiding in the area. It appeared this was a spawn point. As she inspected the area, he mentioned that he had almost wiped out the slimes earlier, but they had respawned quickly. Hearing this, Adele told him not to worry, she would handle it. Drawing her sword with confidence, she remarked that she could finish them off in one hit. She ordered him to move aside as she prepared to fight the slimes. The slimes attacked as soon as they spotted her, but with a single swing of her sword, Adele annihilated them all, leaving a deep, destructive mark where she had struck. Watching this, he was a bit impressed, though he couldn't resist teasing her, commenting that her aggressive method seemed like overkill, practically burying the slimes alive. Hearing this, Adele's face flushed with anger and she glared at him menacingly. Meanwhile, one slime had survived and was sneaking up to attack her. To her surprise, he suddenly used magic to obliterate the slime. Handel couldn't believe it. She distinctly remembered that he couldn't use proper magic. Shocked, she was lost in thought as he casually asked if she hadn't noticed it behind her. Still reeling from surprise, she fumbled for an excuse, trying to claim she had known all along but hadn't reacted. Before she could finish her sentence, he started to leave, calling for his cute basilisk to follow him, saying they needed to go. He added, almost offhandedly, that it was a relief if she truly had noticed the slime. As he walked away, deep down, Adele realized the truth. She hadn't sensed the slime approaching from behind. She also noticed that Hansia's spell, his arrow of magic, had a level of precision far beyond what she would expect from a beginner. Just as he began to speak, his words were cut off by a sudden error in the dungeon, triggering an emergency alarm that echoed throughout the space. Both of them instantly became alert. He asked her if she knew of any device that could have caused this, but she was just as clueless. As they stood there trying to figure out what was happening, a man in the principal's office reported to the honorary principal about the emergency in the training ground dungeon. The principal, hearing this, inquired if there had been an error with the spell, and asked for details on the current situation inside the dungeon, including which students were present. The man replied that 2 students were inside, one of them being Han Seo-hyun. Upon hearing Hansia's name, the principal sighed and remarked that Hansia was a known troublemaker, implying that even if the boy died, it wouldn't be a significant loss. However, he noted that the other student, a girl named Adele, was different. She was promising and talented, and her safety was a matter of concern.